I live in the weak and the wounded. Session 9. I love Session 9. It is easily one of the best horror films of the 2000s. And looking at a lot of lists today, I wouldn't be alone in saying that, but for a long time, the cult following around this film was intensely small. I would say almost non-existent. I'm not a delusional person, but I wouldn't be surprised if its new reputation as a brilliant horror film was due to me at 12 or 13 years old, or like all throughout my middle school years, like showing this movie to everybody. Everybody who came over to my house, anybody who would fucking sit there and watch it, I would show it to them. I'd even show it to like girls on dates, and I've had conversations years later of like, "Oh yeah, you had me watch that god awful, boring movie about a mental institution." And I'm like, "Girl, what I ever see in you?" You know what I mean? Session 9 is fucking brilliant. I don't trust people who don't love this film. Session 9 is about a group of workers from the Hazmat Elimination Company who are hired to rid the asbestos and fiber of a long abandoned, shut down, derelict, dilapidated, haunting, spooky mental hospital. The film is directed by Brad Anderson exceptionally well. I think the sound editing, um, I guess just the editing, really, visual and audio. It's incredible. The sonic texture to this film is probably the most haunting thing about it. It derives its name, Session 9, from a series of tapes that a character called Mike secretly listens to and becomes implicitly obsessed with. They deal with a patient called Mary Hobbs, who had suffered from a very cinematic and Hollywood kind of mania, that of multiple personality disorder. She has these three personalities, that of the princess, Billy, and Simon. Doc. And Simon is by far one of the most enduringly chilling boogeymen that I've ever heard. Not seen, mind you. The voice acting for these tapes is just top notch. It's flawless. That voice of Simon's gets stuck in your head the way that it should, and you'll find yourself having nightmares or doubting your own sanity. It, yeah, it was like a fear of mine in my 20s for some reason. I thought that I would be the type to go schizophrenic. I don't know. I mean, check out my channel. You can see why I would assume that maybe my brain still isn't all there. But I used to have a legitimate fear of mania, of mental illness when I was in my 20s. I would get scared of slipping into some sort of psychosis, some sort of hopeless and seething mania, right? I was scared of going insane. We all have the capacity for dark places within us, and all we need sometimes is that voice that says, "Hi." What is this? The fuck is that? And oh my God, you gotta look fucking nice for this fucking camera. All right, so I think that Session I is actually saying an awful lot. I think that a large part of what it is saying is a commentary on the place of mental illness within an alienated, ultra modern society. That mental illness is something that we think as a culture we could just erase, that we can fix, or that we can like truly ignore, right? That we can pretend never actually happened. Hence, these are like hazmat workers. They're in protective gear, and they're going in here, and you think you can just get rid of all of the mold, all of the decay, all of that poisonous decay, that part of culture that if you breathe it in, it infects you. It's an infectious sort of illness, and it's truly the illness of neglect. We can't get rid of mental illness. We can't act like it is some product of the past. It's not a piece of found footage. It's not some fun YouTube video. It's not just a building abandoned and in need of desperate repair. Mental illness can't be swept under the rug. Mental illness can't be forgotten because mental illness is one of the few constants of the human story. It makes a couple, I think, understated and subtle, nuanced political statements as well. These are blue collar workers. And by the way, they are extremely believable archetypes. I've done a lot of blue collar work. I did some morbid shit like in manual labor and blue collar work. The most morbid thing I've done was a group of guys here in Florida where we would build like cremation chambers, cremation fucking stations. I never heard anyone say an exact name for them. The fucking cremators. What the fuck? I don't know. The shit that you burn the bodies in. It was, well, no one would actually say the name because it was quite morbid to believe that we were making them for adults, for babies, for pets, for children, right? It was a very morbid job, very morbid gig, but the people there were of a checkered past, but also just quite friendly and easy to get along with. I think the archetypes in session 9, I think it nails it. I think you go to any construction job or you go to any truly laborious job, and you will find archetypes like these. You'll find a Mike, you'll find a Phil, you'll find a Gordon. Be careful with that Gordon, I guess. It plays into the notion of madness as a result of alienation and psychological unavailability. And why do stories like these fixate us so much? Why do we get so invested in stories of mania, of hysterics? Why do we get so invested in these stories? Because we all have the sort of capacity for those kinds of hallucinatory sprees of madness. We all have a psychotic part within us. We all have a dark part within us. And if session 9 posits that a truly mad sort of hyperviolence exists in the weak and the wounded, and session 9 also shows us a pretty alienated world where when they're not at their jobs, we don't see them when they're not at their jobs really much at all. We see Gordon in snips and pieces, isolated from his family. We see Phil sitting by himself drinking at a bar. We see Hank just sitting there, like looking like a slob, like his shirt's like pulled up to here, and he's just being yelled at by his girl. We get ideas about Mike and how he's probably a disappointment to his family, to his father, who is like a state district attorney or something, and here Mike is doing manual labor, doing grunt work. We get Jeff, who is a fairly awkward kid. Suffers from nyctophobia, fear of the dark. He doesn't seem like the most socially intelligent human being. These are people who feel entirely isolated or alienated from almost everything that we would come to characterization with, that we would characterize like healthy emotional expression with. And if madness, if hyper-violent madness, if the capacity for it lives within the weak and the wounded, we have a nation of the weak and the wounded. And what happens to you? Eventually, with budget cuts, with satanic panic, with media sensationalism, and with financial upheavals, the institution will be shut down. Nice. Nice. My voice just cracked. Becoming a man. They make it a point through Mike of expressing perhaps a sort of more bourgeois or a more intellectual interest in these kinds of materials. He seems to be the one who knows quite a bit about the history of the institution. He's the one who talks about the budget cuts and satanic panic. He's the one listening to the tapes. He's the one most invested in that. I think he's morbidly fascinated by the idea of madness, of a personal and private torment, a personal and private hell unleashed on an alienated and alienating world. The film makes it a point of saying that the biggest fear are people trying to break back in, that when these mental institutions shut down, most of its patients become homeless. I think most of the homeless that you see in your neighborhoods, I'm talking in actual reality now, they suffer from mental illness. Mental illness is everywhere, and it's not being treated, it's not being helped, and these great institutions are shutting down like wildfire. But madness does not stay in the past. Madness is, I wouldn't even say it's adaptive. Madness is simply eternal. Simon is eternal. Hello, Gordon. It's never gonna go away. We can't fix it up. We can't erase it. We're helpless in the face of the kind of horror that Session 9 is expressing. I think it's wonderfully put together. I think David Caruso gives an exceptionally sensitive performance here. Brendan Sexton III, who plays Jeff, is one of the most authentic actors I've ever seen. I've never doubted him in any role. He's very incredible all the time. The film itself is, like I said, it's kind of it's masterful in its use of editing, sound editing, montage, voice acting, in its thematics, in its aesthetics, in its comprehension of tension. It's incredible. It's an incredible film that really does try to speak to the weak and wounded parts of all of us. Because we all have those parts. We are all weak and wounded, and maybe one day we'll say yes. They always say yes. Thank you for watching my video. I've been your cult boyfriend talking about 2001 Session 9. Just hit the microphone. Session 9. And yeah, it's one of my favorite horror films. I would call it one of the 10 best horror films of the 2000s. No question. No question at all. It's one of those incredibly special kinds of jewels. I really couldn't praise this film enough. It's an astonishingly good one. And that, my friends, is all I have to say about it. Thanks.